Welcome to the Anxiety Coaches Podcast, a relaxing and informative show where we explore anxiety, panic, and PTSD, sharing how you can overcome them for life.
Aloha! Welcome back to the Anxiety Coaches Podcast. I'm your host and coach, Gina Ryan, and I am so happy to be with you again today as together we can consider the many ways to bring your mind and body back to its natural peace and calm. In today's episode, I am talking about being able to overcome anxious symptoms. So many times we can get hung up on the symptoms and the sensations and get stuck in that mode thinking that we have got to learn to just deal with it or cope with it. And I want to talk to you today about how you can get over these anxious symptoms and sensations. So what are some of these anxiety symptoms and sensations? You know, we talk about a lot of them here and there on the show, but I thought it was time to really let you know that you too can get over these, because I am forever hearing from people that they felt alone. I get that when I have people leaving messages on social media, when they are leaving email for me from listening to the show, and from clients and group members. We think that the thing that we're dealing with is kind of the exception and that nobody else may have had this. So let's just review some of the anxious symptoms that you may be trying to deal with, thinking that you're just going to have to learn how to cope with it somehow, that you cannot overcome it. Because I'm here to tell you that you can. Things that come up are things like hard to breathe, like you have trouble breathing. We just got a beautiful testimonial from someone who listened to the show on breathing and was amazed that she was not alone in feeling the way that she did. We can have an out-of-body experience, feeling like we are not present in our body. That's kind of an odd feeling that you may have never felt any other time in your life. So of course you're going to think this is something weird, unusual, and that there must be something definitely wrong with you. You could be feeling just basic, old-fashioned anxiety that leads to panic. And that can feel overwhelming. It could be your heart is starting to beat differently or faster, maybe skipping beats or pounding or thumping beats. You could feel shaky, like you are really nervous or actually physically shaking from the inside out, like you are cold, the shivers. You may want to be alone. You may feel like you don't want to be with people, that people are bringing up all kinds of anxious feelings for you, so you isolate yourself. You could feel dizzy. Dizziness is such a big symptom that I hear about that people think that no one else feels. So I want to state it here. Dizziness can be one of your anxiety symptoms, as can be the basic sweaty palms or just nervous feeling. You could be unable to focus. This can be a big one. When you are normally in your groove, you work, you take care of everything, and all of a sudden you're feeling like you can't focus on one thing at a time. You're having great difficulty getting through the days. Lack of focus is something that's reported quite often, as is extreme fatigue. Being tired has many different places that it could be coming from, and your anxiety is one of them. You know, sometimes people report that they can't sit still. So we can go from one extreme to the other, as you can see. We can go from having nervous energy where we want to get up and move around, or we're shaking from the inside out, and we really have to get up and move and go, to the extreme fatigue where we feel like we can't get out of bed. We can feel like we can't sit still. It can be that end of the spectrum. You could be at the end where you can't get out of bed, you're exhausted and depressed, or you can feel like you have so much nervous energy that you can't sit still and you have to be up and moving. It doesn't matter that these are two extremes of the same spectrum. They are both individually symptoms of being anxious. For you as a person, where do you land on that spectrum? It doesn't mean that one end is peaceful and calm and the other end is nervous and anxious. No, your extreme fatigue and your inability to get out of bed and being depressed can also be coming from being anxious, just as not being able to sit still can be. We can get into the place where the nausea, the gut comes in, the need to find a bathroom immediately, the need to urinate more often, the need to be taking medications for your gut on a regular basis, which is not something that is normal. Nausea, all of these feelings in the gut area are quite common, but are overlooked also as anxious symptoms because our gut is one of the first things that shuts down when we are in a fight or flight stressful situation. So all of that shuts down and, well, things got to go somewhere. And so you can either feel nauseous, you can feel like you have to run to the bathroom, but just know that that can be a part of your anxiety. We can also get into the realm where we're giving ourselves a hard time on top of what's happening to us on the outside. We talk to ourselves with negative self-talk. We give ourselves a hard time, beat ourselves up, call ourselves names, or give ourselves more pressure to accomplish more every day than need be. We have to learn to be a little bit nicer to ourselves. Often when we're anxious, we can't explain how we're feeling, and that in and of itself can be another symptom, as can be tingling in hands and feet, being afraid of dying, having irrational thoughts, being downright irritable and hard to be with, constant worrying, and the old what if. If your thoughts are running around with what if, that's probably your anxious thinking. Now, I want to share with you how all of this and a dozen or 10 dozen more symptoms and sensations can be coming from your anxiety and how you can overcome all this. You don't have to learn to just cope with it. And I want to get to that with an email that I recently received. So I recently received this email from one of our past group members, and he gave me permission to read this on the show. And he said, "Hi, Gina, I wanted to take a moment to thank you for helping me get to where I am today. I am no longer living in the fear of what might happen. I'm confident that my body will always reset itself, and I'm able to say yes when my kids ask if we can go somewhere without mapping myself to the nearest hospital or checking the weather to see if there is fog. You've been with me for the last 5 years, and I'll never forget our first conversation or the group meetings I participated in. I will always consider you a close friend of mine, even though we don't talk often. I know you'd answer if I called or messaged you. I've accepted that the journey with anxiety is never really over, and quite honestly, it's a great reminder that we are in fact still alive, which is what I am thankful for every day." He goes on to say, "I'm sure you know this better than anyone, but when you're at your lowest of the lows and hear how someone is doing well, you wonder if they even had it as bad as you. I was definitely in the lowest of lows, waking up every morning with the here we go again feeling. Those full member Zooms were so helpful. I got to the point where I broke the fear loop. When the what if thoughts popped up, I responded with, so what? Do your thing. Getting out of that fear loop is something that we can all do. It just takes being committed to saying, so what? And seeing if the worst case scenario actually happens. Guess what? It doesn't. That's something you've told us time and time again, and I will be forever grateful that I finally have the confidence to see it for myself. And that's from JC. And I want to thank you, JC, for sending that in and giving me permission to read that to those people who are listening and actually wondering if these symptoms and sensations that they are experiencing can be overcome. Or do they have to map out, as our past member and listener used to have to do, map out the route to the hospital or check the weather to see if it's foggy, because that was a challenge to drive in. If you have any of these symptoms that we talked about earlier in the show, just know you don't have to cancel your plans. You don't have to isolate yourself. Just because you are having these symptoms, you can do, as we've talked about here, and as our past member mentioned, you can say, so what? And do your thing. You can try this on for yourself. There is nothing special about this particular member beyond the fact that he's an amazing person, and I am thrilled to know him. But everything that he did, you can do too. I know that it feels like yours is different. Every person that I have talked to about anxiety has some point where they feel like, yeah, but, like, oh yes, all these other people did all these things, yeah, but mine is different, or I'm weird. And that's true. All of us do have a very unique recipe for our own stress and anxiety, but they can all be worked through. We can overcome this wormhole living that we're doing, where we stay in it day in and day out, getting up, as I used to say, and as my past member here said, with the, oh no, here we go again every morning. We don't have to do that. We can break those cycles. And the way you do it is to take the practices and the tips and tools that we talk about on all of these different episodes and do them. Do the ones that were ringing true for you when you listened to it. That's why I always suggest getting a journal that you kind of open up when you're listening to this show, or afterwards when you're reflecting maybe on what you heard, and jotting down what struck you during that show. Like, was there something in that email that I read to you from JC that rang true for you that you want to remember? Jot those things down. In the other shows that you've listened to here, have you heard a practice that you said, oh, that sounds like that could be really helpful for me? Jot it down and then do it. Don't think about it anymore. Do it. Put it into practice, because that's where we start teaching our body that other things can be true at the same time, such as our listener wrote that he would say, so what, do your thing, to his anxious thought. He would still have the thought, it was there, but he let it be there. Do your thing, come on, show me what you got, right? And so what he was doing there was accepting the feeling or the sensation or the thought that was coming up and letting it do its thing Everything comes and goes. But what we do when we wake up in the morning and say, oh no, here we go again, we didn't accept that sensation of icky cortisol feeling in the morning. We added more fuel to it. And that's what our resistance to our anxiety symptoms does to us. It adds more fuel to the fire. And so I'm telling you that you can overcome these anxious symptoms by first stopping adding fuel. It'll die out. It'll rise and fall much faster. It'll burn itself out if you don't add more fuel to it. So that's the first thing to remember. And the second thing I want you to take away from today's show is to actually participate with me in this show by jotting these ideas down. If something speaks to you, writing out the practice and then doing it. Let's do this together. And then let me know on Facebook or in an email or on Instagram what you thought, what worked for you. Because every time you take a practice and stop thinking about it and actually put it into physical practice, you are telling yourself that it is possible for you to do something different when those anxious symptoms and sensations arise. You don't have to fall into the same old habit over and over again. I know you can do this, and I hope I get an email from you just like I got from JC telling me how you did and giving me permission to read it on the show so that I can share it with everybody else. I love being here with you, and I hope that today you got the idea to go from thinking about making changes to actually physically putting into practice some of the things we talk about here. And now for today's quote. What else does anxiety about the future bring you but sorrow upon sorrow? And that's from Thomas à Kempis. I'll be back in a few more days with another podcast. Until then, be well and aloha.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode of the Anxiety Coaches Podcast. Find more information at theanxietycoachespodcast.com.